the NCAA and whatever, we've turned it into a complete business. I was just having this conversation yesterday. We are no different than Major League Baseball anymore in terms of free agency.
Absolutely right.
And cutting players and getting them to commit for a year and building teams. We're building teams now, not programs.
Okay, hold on. We got to talk about this. Okay. All right, guys, if you have questions about what really goes on in college baseball, you are going to love today's guest. I am joined today by TJ Bruce. He's the new head baseball coach at Long Beach State. Now, TJ and I have known each other for quite some time. And in this episode, we're going to discuss a range of topics, and we're going to go well beyond just talking about how college baseball is a game where amateur players go to develop. We talk about how it's a business, and a big one at that. Now, the truth is that college sports is an ever-evolving landscape, and it's constantly changing. Now, one of the biggest changes has been the impact that the transfer portal has had and how it's created kind of like a free agency of sorts among college players. But like everything, there are both positives and negatives, and we're going to discuss both. TJ also shares his journey from a multi-sport athlete as a kid growing up to his role now as a coach. In this episode, you're going to hear why he's placed such a big emphasis on development over results. And TJ, he doesn't shy away from discussing the real challenges that not only players and parents face, but coaches and programs do as well. If you are listening to this episode, you're going to hear things rarely talked about in college baseball, but you're also going to hear some of the more common topics like the importance of character, accountability, and long-term growth over immediate success. I cannot wait to hear what you guys think of my episode with the one and only TJ Bruce. All right, so today we are joined by TJ Bruce, the new head baseball coach at Long Beach State. A friend of mine, somebody I've known for a long time. TJ, can't thank you enough for joining me, buddy.
No, man, good to see you. Good to see your face. We don't get to see enough of each other, but it's awesome. Anything for you, and glad to be on.
Absolutely. So just to kind of tee this off a little bit, I know you've listened to some of the episodes, but just to kind of give you a flavor. So obviously this podcast was created to provide parents and players who are kind of in youth travel baseball, right? Like the amateur level player, give them actionable advice. So if you think about what we talk through, like think about it from the perspective of how can I give these parents and these players like actionable advice that they can ultimately take and then apply it to their lives?
I don't think we have enough time, do we?
I don't think so either.
That topic is a touchy topic. I have a story for you on that one, by the way. So last night I'm talking to a really good friend of mine. I'll reserve his name, but really good friend, really good family friend. We're texting, hey, how's so-and-so going? How's this going? And they're in the search for another travel team. So his son's 9. And basically what's going on is his game changer stats weren't good enough for one team. So they were told to find another team. And that was about 7:30 after driving back from Fort Worth. And that just kind of led me down this whole rabbit hole of amateur baseball. Like, where are we going? Where are we at? Let's identify where we're at. Let's identify where we want to go. And then what are we doing? Is basically what I'm looking at. And I'm just thinking back to the 9-year-old self, right? It's like, we didn't have stats. We didn't have game change. We didn't have none of it. We just went out and it was so much about development. And our industry has gotten so far away from development. It's a lot of things that have happened, but that's just one thing. You just struck the chord right there. One thing is that a 9-year-old kid now has to be focused on his game changer stats, or did he get a hit and he's living a result-oriented life? And that's not right. Thankfully enough, mom and dad are so grounded and stable, and they're like, hey, we're not doing this. This is about development, and we're gonna move him along to where he needs to go to be developed better as a person and a player.
So what I love about you, and for anybody who doesn't know you or hasn't heard you speak before, I think what we share is this passion for really trying to correct what we think is being done poorly or incorrectly. And so the thing that I want everybody to kind of hear on this podcast is you're somebody who you are essentially in all of the players' shoes, right? You have lived, this has been your life right? For almost your whole life, right? Now you're a coach, but before that, you were a player. So I guess walk us through your journey as a player. What type of player were you? What did that look like? And really take us up to the point where you stopped playing.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was just a typical kid growing up. I played in multiple sports. I was actually probably a better soccer player than a baseball player, to be honest. But at that point, I felt like growing up, my parents didn't know a whole lot of soccer. But I played soccer 12 months a year. Maybe
Oh,
11
wow.
months. So what people are doing with baseball now, I was doing that with soccer. Baseball was just always something for me that I think I was just naturally good at and I enjoyed. And so I ended up picking that up because at that point, I don't know how big the American soccer was going back in the early 90s. I don't think it wasn't taking off. It was just something that, you saw overseas or whatnot. But anyway, so I went the baseball route, played Little League, didn't play 1 ounce, one pitch. I haven't seen one pitch in travel ball in my whole career. I never played one, never did it. Played baseball for 3 or 4 months, and then I played soccer all the way until I was 17 years old. And then at
Oh,
that
wow.
point, it was something that I had to choose. Like, I think I was going to be a junior, maybe 16. I was going to be a junior. I had to eventually pick one because I felt like that's where the career was going. Like, hey, I got to be able to dive into one and give it all. But so it was soccer, it was baseball, sprinkle in a little Pop Warner, and then high school football my freshman year. And then that was it with the football thing. But predominantly two sports that no one really thinks about. Going to high school, went to St. John Bosco High School, and then I was a non-qualifier coming out of high school. So that base for everybody, that means I couldn't get in. I didn't get a good enough score on the SAT to get into a 4-year school. So I had to go the JC route. I ended up going to Cerritos Junior College, which was another great experience. But you talk about like just that time, right? Because you had guys getting drafted, and I didn't even really know about the draft. I played area codes, right? But I don't think I knew the magnitude, and I don't think it was like it was now. Area codes was fine. It was the Dodgers back then, so that was cool. And we played at Blair too, but I didn't really know. I didn't know what it was. But going back into the life thing, it's like all of a sudden you graduate high school and you had a friend get drafted here. You had this friend go to Cal State Fullerton or Long Beach State, which at the time, right, those were the premier powers, right, especially on the West. And so then you're like, oh, what am I going to do? And then you just went to Cerritos College just because, hey, you heard my high school coach played at Cerritos, but I knew the foundation of what Cerritos College was, but also because it was like, oh, I'm just going to go play and see what happens. Ended up playing 2 years there and went to Texas Tech for a year and had a great time at Tech. It was awesome. I actually probably had my best career, my best season of my whole career was at Texas Tech. And then there was just something a little bit missing. Really, I wanted to go to Omaha, and I think at that point I kind of realized what it was. You're seeing it on TV, and I remember the first thought. There's two things that stick out in my mind when I kind of started watching the College World Series was Alex Cora, right? We all remember the famous picture of him laying face down in 1998, and I was just a sophomore going to my junior year of college or high school. And that just it resonated, but not yet like what it was. And then the next time was Chris Burke, right? Chris Burke goes on this tear at the University of Tennessee, and that's partially why a lot of people wear number 2 because of Derek Jeter. That's actually why I started wearing number 2 was because of Chris Burke. Played shortstop, played at Tennessee. So that was always stuck in my mind. And so after Tech, I was just looking for a place that I wanted to come and go to Omaha. And I actually really wanted to come back home. And I ended up coming on to Long Beach and playing for Coach Weathers, which was an incredible experience. And I had the worst year of my whole career. I ended up hitting 187 as a senior in college, which was not good, as everybody knows. But it was good because I felt like I'm a man of my faith, right? But I felt like God was preparing me for something bigger and something else because I had two ends of the spectrum. I had the high side and no draft, I had the low side and obviously no draft, and your career's done. I wasn't really a pro guy, I don't think. I thought I was a guy that can handle the bat. I was an average runner, but I think that I can really defend, and that was kind of my thing. My ticket was my defense. So you just wonder what would have been if I would have hit just 250.
Right.
Kind of a swing guy, can play all three spots and can play short. We had a guy when I transferred into Long Beach. The first time I ever played another position outside of shortstop was at Long Beach State, my senior year of college, and it's because we had Tulo here. So obviously,
Right.
which
For
was
good reason.
yeah, good reason, right? It's like, man, who's this guy? And then all of a sudden you figure out who he is. You're like, okay, I got it. So I played a lot of second, played a lot of third, but there was just a lot of learning in that time. And after 2004, we ended up losing in the supers to Arizona. We lost 2-1 in 10 innings. And after that, it was, what do I do? I was in this limbo thing, and that's kind of really what happened with my playing career.
I feel like with knowing your journey and how it's turned out, we can sit here today, obviously, and hindsight's always 20/20, but I feel like you were prepared perfectly, especially for the role that you currently have right now with Long Beach, right? But I'm curious. So playing gets done, and as you're going into coaching, was there something that needed to change about you going from that player to that coach? Like, was there a transition period where like that you learned something and then that helped you flip the script?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know if there was this one thing, but I think what happened is I didn't really want to get into coaching.
Oh, interesting.
I was looking for I always thought too, and I was told this by Dennis Rogers a long time ago, is the game's going to check you and the game will retire you when the game's ready for you to retire. And that was one thing that I took to heart as an amateur player. And the game retired me. I wasn't good enough to move on. I didn't want to be one of those guys that was hanging on to it. And so I was like, I'm not going to coach. I'm going to get out of this thing. I had 1 year left of school to finish. So it's like, okay, I applied for, like everybody else, you applied for a sales job somewhere because there was a little bit of that competing and you did different things. And I didn't really have any avenue where to go. No doors were really opening. And then Coach Weathers actually called me back that summer, and he called me 3 times. The first 2 times I didn't want to do it. He goes, come back as an undergrad. And I just had no interest in doing it. And so the third time he goes, hey, I found a job for you. You're going to work at the docks down in Long Beach from 6 a.m. to 1 p.m. And you're going to get your undergrad degree and you can help us coach. And I'm like, oh, man, all right. So the third time was a charm. I finally said, well, I got to finish school. I'm going to be on campus. So let's do it. And so I did it. And then at that point, I don't think I really was sold on the coaching part. I actually thought coaching, to be honest, was cool shoes, a sweet polo, and you just you were here on the field and then you went out and you hung out with your buddies all night. I had no sense of what adult life was. And I really had no sense what coaching was, to be honest.
Right.
And so it wasn't really until at the end of that year, I'll never forget, Coach Willers were sitting in the office and I really wasn't sure what I was going to do. I got my degree. Now what am I going to do? The volunteer job, I believe, was open at the time at Long Beach. And he told me, he goes, hey, I don't want you to come back here. I need you to go figure out if you want to coach. Oh. And so at that point, I didn't come back to Long Beach. I went to Cerritos College and I made $5,000 the whole year. And then that's where I figured out about the coaching thing, about figuring out who I was, what I wanted to do. And I think we're always figuring that out. But I think that was where I really buckled down and been like, hey, I want to coach and I want to do this. How am I going to do that? And it kind of led me back to Long Beach as a volunteer. And so after that was 05. After the 05 season, it led me back into Long Beach, starting the 06 season. I was at Cerritos. 07 through 2010. I was a volunteer at Long Beach State, working the jobs at the docks from 6 to 1. I coached summer ball one summer for 3 months. I was in Alaska. I was married at the time. I just had a baby at the time. I had no benefits. My wife was getting her teaching credential. And it was a grind, so I'm super sensitive to, I guess, the older generation a little bit of coaching and working. And I'm probably don't give as much grace to the younger generation because the guys coming up or the guys that have just left pro ball, they're like, oh, I can coach. And it's like, no, you don't really know what it's like to get in the trenches with these guys. You don't know what it's like. Recruiting and evaluating are two different things.
Right.
Right. You don't really know what that looks like. And so I'm very thankful for my journey because it taught me a lot. And I'm very thankful also because anytime I ask somebody now to do something, I've done it before. I did laundry. I was a married man with a daughter, and I did laundry till 3 and 4 in the morning to get up and then to go throw BP on a Saturday morning, and then to do it all again Saturday, and then get back up and get to work on Monday morning at 6 a.m. painting. I was painting poles and dumping out jet fuel.
Wow.
I mean, I was just cleaning bathrooms, and it was just a way for me to get into this coaching life and prove to myself that I wanted to do it, but also prove to everybody else. Because during those times, right, you have different challenges. And one challenge for me was somebody told me at the time, I can't be a good coach and be married at the same time. And I'm
wow.
like, well, yeah. That was a real thing. And I'm like, really? Okay, really? And so then to be super transparent, I actually left my wife in 2008.
Wow.
I moved out of our house. We were married, God, for 2 years. And I moved out of my house because I'm like, yeah, I can't do this. Coaching's all about X, Y, Z. It's not about family. It's not about faith. I can't do any of that. And thank God, she believed in our marriage, and God believed in our marriage. And we ended up, now we've been married almost 18 years.
Wow.
A lot to unpack.
I have so many questions. We could have a totally separate podcast about marriage, I'm realizing. But you said a couple things that I think are really important for these people to hear. So the first is, you talked a lot about how when you got done playing, right, there was a moment in time in which, you said it was Dennis Rodgers told you, the game's going to tell you when it's time to retire. And I think when players play pro ball, they oftentimes take their passion for the game and that they love the game and miss the game. And so they think that's their body's way of telling them, I'm not done yet. Right. And I've had to tell players 25, 26, 27, let's say if their career hasn't panned out, they go to independent ball, they now have a family. I've had to have the hard conversations with these players like, hey man, like, you have a responsibility to your family. I'm letting you know what this journey looks like. If you want to continue on this path, okay. But just know this is not going to be an easy road for you. So just see it clearly, make a decision based on that. And even to this day, I'll see guys and they'll tell me, hey man, thank you for really not forcing them, but really helping them see that there is life beyond baseball, right? Mm-hmm. So to anybody who's listening, it's like, yeah, and I agree with Dennis. This game will tell you when it's time to go. And it's not necessarily the residual passion that you have that you should listen to 100% of the time. Like, you have to listen to people in your corner who you trust, who are helping you along the way, who care about you. And then the other thing that you said, which I think is profound, you talked about Coach Weathers, and Coach Weathers found this job for you. But what I loved about what you said is he was encouraging you, look, listen, man, like, you've got to go out and figure out if you want to coach, right? And knowing, TJ, who you are as a coach and who you are as a person, there is much more than meets the eye. You're not somebody who's like, look, man, call me when it's about baseball. If it's not about baseball, like, I don't got time for it. You're somebody who invests in the person, right? Maybe more than the baseball player. And that's why when you got hired at Long Beach, somebody who went to Long Beach, like, I got super excited. And I know I texted you about this, like, hey man, we're bringing back the glory days, because anybody who's going to have success in that role, you have to be somebody who sees beyond just the baseball field. And the more people that we have in college, especially, who see it that way, I think the better off we're all going to be.
Yeah, for sure. And it's hard, right? And it's hard. And I think why it's hard is because our identity is wrapped up in in our career, or so we think, right? And so that's always what we're battling. We're battling it you've went through it. I go through it, right? You're battling this thing about, well, my playing career is not done because I'm a baseball player. That's who I am. That's what I've always known. Now what are people going to know me as? And that's okay, right? That's okay that you're not, because you're bigger than the game, right? In terms of your person and your persona is bigger than the 9 innings, right? You have a greater gift. The problem is that there's a lot of people that don't get to that greater gift because they have been so tied up in their identity is what they do, and that's not what they do. But that takes a lot of growing. It's not even change, man. It's growing, and it's having the ability to be super self-aware and to understand that, like I just told you before we got on air, it's like, I'm a baseball coach. That's great. I mean, I can have a chance to affect a lot of lives, or you're an agent, or you're this, that's all great, but that's not who we are. We're not solving cancer here, man. We're not.
Right.
We're not. Now, we may save career or people's lives in other ways, shapes, or forms, but we're not, we make this thing out to be sometimes way bigger than it is, in my opinion.
I totally agree. I think the perspective that you're talking about is an important one, and I think sometimes players, maybe out of fear a little bit, feel like, and maybe it's, what you were going through when you left your wife, when you first got into coaching. It's like, this has to be all I am, or I'm not going to be successful. And what I think these players don't recognize is, no, it's going to be because of who you are that is going to make you successful. Know where that starts. It's not the baseball, it's the person. And the person is going to make whoever shows up on that baseball field way much more of an impactful player than you otherwise would be able to if all you had 100% of the time was just baseball. So I totally agree with you there. I want to get into coaching though. So if we just take a step back, right? Before Long Beach, obviously before the head coaching job at Long Beach, and after you left Long Beach as an assistant, you ended up going up to Nevada, right? Yep. You were the head coach at Nevada, and you had a lot of success. I think you were coach of the year a couple years. You guys had put together a handful of years that that university hadn't really experienced. And then you decided to leave and you went to TCU, and you weren't the head coach at TCU, right?
Yep.
Tell us, what was that decision about? What were you looking to achieve?
Yeah, interesting, right? Because you weren't seeing that at that time, and now you're seeing it. So maybe I affected change to a degree, but really what I was seeing the landscape of college baseball and where it was going. And so I went to Nevada, and I loved Reno. We actually still have a home in Reno. I absolutely love the Lake Tahoe, Reno area. I love the community there. They're incredible people. Really why I made the jump is because you're still chasing it, right? I think we're still always chasing something. I think that's part of what motivates us. We're chasing something. I was in the running for a lot of the jobs. Washington job, the Oregon job, the Long Beach job the first time in 2019, right? The Fullerton job in 19, and I was always the bridesmaid a little bit. And so what I thought was happening was part of, what an AD looks for is they need to win the press conference, right? Yeah. So a little bit of what was happening was, are they going to win the press conference hiring me from Nevada, or are they going to win the press conference hiring me from a big school? Right. That was one thing. But the other part, I'll tell you, is what I wanted to get back to. I want to get back to coaching. And part of this thing, part of the mid-major life is you're not coaching. Right. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of other things you're doing. There's a lot of fundraising you're doing. There's a lot of, and being a head coach, especially, there's a lot of things that are pulling you a lot of different directions. Right. So when I felt like I lost that part of me a little bit. And I felt like even when we made the regional for the first time in 2 decades at Nevada in 2021, and I felt like all I was ever worried about was who was the next person I need to meet. I never took the time to enjoy the regional with those guys. And it was an unbelievable group because they were with me for 5 years, most of those guys. And I was there at practice, but I wasn't mentally there because I was thinking about, I got to raise money for this. I got to raise money for that. I got to go meet this person. I got to do that. And so really that was part of it. And then the other part, right, is I want to go back to Omaha, and I felt at the time where I was at, I felt that I did what I could at Nevada and they needed a new voice. And that's hard. That's a lot of self-reflection, a lot of prayer, a lot of different things go into making those decisions to look at yourself and say, hey, they need somebody else to maybe take them further or move them forward. That's hard. That's hard to do because that's all my kids know. My kids were raised in Reno. That's their home. Their home's not Long Beach. And so those were the three things going through, and it was awesome. It was great. My 2 years in Fort Worth were awesome and an incredible program. You had the high there again. You had the highs and the lows in 2 separate years. You go to Omaha, right? You have the best offense that TCU's ever had, right, in the 1 year. So there again, the offensive coach part of me, you're all of a sudden up here and you're like, yeah. And then the next year you don't make a regional. And you have a really bad offense. And so now all of a sudden you're playing this result game and you're like, am I good enough? Am I not? And all those thoughts creep in. And then fortunately enough, the Long Beach job was opening, or, you kept getting wind that it was going to open and it ended up opening. And there again, it's God's timing, man. It's not ours. And I thought I'm right where I need to be, where he wants me to be. And fortunately enough, Bobby made the hire and hired my family to come back to Long Beach.
Amazing. So you referenced a year at TCU where you guys had the best offense they've ever had, right? Mm-hmm. And I want to talk a little bit about, because I know in 23 you guys were 23-20, I think, with like 13 games to go, right? Mm-hmm. Tell us what happened after that.
Wow. Well, I'll tell you what happened before that. So what happened before that was we go to West Virginia and we get swept. I mean, we're kind of in the thick of it at that point, and we get swept on the road. Tough place to play. It's cold. It's miserable. Everybody's not good. We get swept. We get on the plane. We get on the charter flight home, and I'm on the bus, and we're supposed to leave the next day to go recruit on Monday, right? We can fly home Sunday. I think our recruiting coordinator and myself are jumping on a plane going out. And I turned around to him and I said, we shouldn't go anywhere tomorrow. And this was on the bus to the airport. And he goes, what do you mean? And I go, we need this. Our players are too good, and we need something with this group or with our staff and do something. We cannot. The easy thing right now is to get around and run, right? Because you're not facing it. So he's like, okay. So we get on the plane and we're flying back to Fort Worth, and I'll turn around to our head coach and I said, hey, what are we going to do to fix this? And it was just a point blank question, right? And there's a lot of ideas being thrown back and forth. There's a lot of like, oh, well, this, well, that. Well, if that, and I'll never forget this. I've always been told this. Coach Savage told me this when I worked for him. Lean on your experience. And I'll never forget saying that to him, because you're talking about Kirk, who played it in the big leagues, right? Had an unbelievable college career, but has been around winning coaches. Mm-hmm. Coach Horton, Coach Vanderhook, and then move into pro ball. And it was like, what would they do? What would George tell you right now? What would Mike Weathers tell me right now? What would Dave Snow tell me right now? And my gut was telling me they would say, do not get on the plane to go recruit. You got to stare this thing head on, and you got to invest in where they're at now. And so anyways, we don't go. We actually go golf, and I'm not really a golfer. Everybody that knows me knows that. I get out there and drive the cart, but I'm bored after 2 holes, and it's just not. I'll walk on your greens, and it's just not good. So Tuesday we played DBU, and we went on a grand slam. Like, it was a must win, and we went on a grand slam. The following weekend, we lose 2 out of 3 to Texas at home. And at that point on, we didn't lose another game, I don't think, the rest of the year. And I credit a lot of people, but first and foremost, the credit goes to the players. because I'll never forget this either. I had the position players over to the house, which I did often, and we were old. We had a lot of old guys. And Braden Taylor, who was a first rounder that year, he looked at me and he goes, "We're going to be just fine." And I'm like, "Braden, we're 23-20. And he goes, "Coach, I'm telling you right now, we're going to be fine." And I'll never forget where I was standing, what was happening. And then after that, he goes nuts. Everybody else goes nuts. And we look up and we're in Omaha.
Wow.
Yeah, it was incredible. It was an incredible feeling to see that, because what gets lost in the translation there that year is change, right? No one likes change, right? Because I think that people look at it wrong. They had Bill Mosiello there for 9 years prior. That team was old. You had a lot of old players. Now you got this new coach coming in. It's a completely different style, even though Bill and I are similar in a lot of ways, right? I'm a little bit more, I don't know what, maybe more abrupt, maybe a more just kind of in your face a little bit. And it took a while for those guys to get used to that. And it took a while for me to get used to them. I was learning them. I didn't want to step on toes. And really, that's what people miss in this whole thing about that year in 23, is that the change part and how change I challenge players a lot because I want to see them come back. And then once I'll never forget this, Elijah Nunez during that stretch, who I still keep in touch with today. He's as tough as they come. I would coach him every day of the week for the rest of my life if I could. Was our center fielder, and I'll never forget, I was being sarcastic one practice during an inter squad. "Yeah, that's all right. We're 23-20. You guys just go ahead. We'll be 30-23 here pretty soon. That's all right. You guys are just mediocre." And I'll never forget this. He yelled from center field, and he yelled at me. And it was, something along the lines that I'm not standing for this stuff anymore. You don't know how good we are. Blah. And at that point, along with what Braden said, I knew we had them right where we wanted them. And at that point, we went nuts. And I mean, you saw the stuff the regional we won the Big 12 tournament, and just really, we mercied, I think, 2 or 3 teams in the tournament. And then we win the Big 12 tournament. We go into Arkansas and we roll Arizona and roll Arkansas twice at Arkansas, which doesn't happen very much. And then we played a really good Indiana State team in the Supers. And next thing you know, we're on a plane to Omaha. And it was like, man, 13 games ago, we were getting ready for the 24 season.
Right. What did you experience? Like, how would you describe? Because what I hear you say, I mean, obviously there needs to be a belief system, right? Mm-hmm. Not just from the coaching staff, but really from the players. Mm-hmm. What did you experience that you want to take forward with you to help create that? Because, it's easy when you have the players. What happens when you see more in the player than they see in themselves? How does it change then?
Well, I think you're always seeing more, right? I think you're always coaching the player for what they are, what they could be versus what they are, right? Or what we're doing with people, because we see more in people than they see sometimes in themselves. And so I always lean on that a lot, is coach them for who you think they are versus where they are now. And that's how the growth process happens. But I think, like you said, you got to have players. I mean, having a first rounder helps. Right. Having a freshman shortstop that was an All-American, that helps. Having Trey Richardson, who was the bona fide leader and the vocal guy at second base, that helps. Right. All that stuff helps. But I think really what I took away from that is a few things. Number one is I should have done a better job connecting earlier in a way that they needed. I did not meet them where they were at. I made them meet me where I was at. And that works if you're talented. If you're talented, and meaning physically talented, that works. Because they're going to play whether they already have. Braden Taylor didn't need me to believe in him, or he already had this belief in himself, right? I think the other part of that is if you're less talented, I always go back to, right, connection. right, is connection is such a big deal. And how can you connect? Because you need them to believe, to achieve, right? They're seeing guys around them that are maybe physically better, physically gifted, and they're like, oh man, I can't do this. Well, that's where the part of connection comes into play. The part of actually walking them through, because what we don't do a good job of, we just do a good job on, if I'm playing the guitar, hey Matt, here's how I play the guitar, and I just run through a song, and you're like, whoa, wait a minute here, I can't do that, I don't know how to do that. We don't ever take the time to walk through it with them and show them the actual physical or the mental steps about where they're at, right? Because we get in these bad places, man. And part of this thing is what I'm going off on a tangent here, but part of this thing is when we're in a bad spot, there's an exercise you can do is write down everybody who says they would help you. And what's going to happen is you won't be able to stop. The problem is we don't take the time to ask. Right. And
is that Stephen Furtick in you?
Yeah.
Right
here?
Yeah.
Did you just listen to that sermon?
Uh-huh.
I just did it this morning. He talks about that, right? And then he talks about the gratitude part, right? Write down what you're thankful for. And then that's all of a sudden you're going to get out of this mental rut. And it hit me today because I just had this big move, right? And people think moving's easy and the coach life is so easy. I just moved my kids twice in the last 2 years. Right. So I'm going through this, man. I got dad guilt. I got husband guilt. I don't think we're going to buy a home in Southern Cal because that's a whole nother issue. Right. We're going to end up renting, and we're selling this big old house in Texas and our dream house. And well, yeah, but what's a dream house? What's that mean?
Right.
I end up, and this is God's provision, right? I end up tying my identity to my house. I didn't tie it to anything else. I'm mourning a house.
Right.
Come on. I mean, we're going to mourn a house. You know, so then you go down these whole, I went off on a tangent, but you go down these whole other things. But I think, like I said, I think it's just going to go back to connection, man. I really do. I think it's connection. I think it's consistency, and I think it's communicating. Those are the three things that you got to do when you're talented. But if you're less talented, those are three musts that you have to be able to do. Connection, consistency, and communication. Those are the three things you got to do.
So what would you say to a parent?
Who there's a lot of things I would say to a parent, but let's
go
ahead.
Well, because I think a lot of times parents have this preconceived notion of what college baseball is when they have a son in high school.
Well, it's a business now.
Right.
Unfortunately, I mean, the NCAA and whatever, we've turned it into a complete business. I was just having this conversation yesterday. We are no different than Major League Baseball anymore in terms of free agency.
Absolutely right.
And cutting players and getting them to commit for a year and building teams. We're building teams now, not programs.
Okay. Hold on. We got to talk about this. Okay. So I think that is so important for parents to actually hear. Because again, like if you follow that train of thought, then I hear, well, you're doing things like just the recognition of it. I mean, look at what I do, right? Why did I create this podcast, right? I created this podcast because there's a need out there. All of these parents and these players don't have the insight. And you said, college baseball is no different than the pros right now. I can make the argument that travel baseball is no different than the pros right now either. Yep. So these kids are becoming professionals at a much younger age before they're able to mature. And so why did I create the podcast? Because I saw that and I recognized these families need this information earlier and earlier now. So rather than wait or only do it for the players that I'm advising, what if I provided this for everybody who needs it for free? Here you go. This is the information that you could benefit from, and take it in. If you want to use it, great. If not, that's fine too. But I think what's important is you're somebody who's also recognized it and you're doing something about it. You can't do anything about it if you're unwilling to accept that it's a reality. Yeah. How many coaches will, it's a business, but no, it's a business. Full stop.
Yep.
Right. And like when we think about, today, for example, today's August 1st, right? And what does that represent? Well, it's the first time you coaches can actually reach out to juniors for the first time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Unless they committed before this rule changed. And, these families, I've talked to a bunch of them, like, how do we handle this conversation? What are the questions we can ask? What would you say? Like, how would you best prepare a family? If you had a son who was going through that the first time in your position, what would you tell him to ask these coaches? Like, what should he consider, talking to them about?
Well, I pray one day I can have a son go through it, because how I would do it is just because, right, you too, right? How we would do it and be their advocate is a lot different than the common person, because we're in the industry. So part of this thing is I always thought this too, is you got to sift through the window shopping. And I'm talking about the Nike or the Adidas or whatever, and the uniforms. Sift through that, and let's take baseball out of this right away. Challenge the coach to tell you, how are they going to coach the three areas? How are you going to coach my son as a person? What are you going to do with him? How will you grow him in that area? How are you going to grow him as a student? How are you going to grow him? Then how are you going to grow him as a player? Those are three areas, I think, and we address that quite a bit, but those are three areas, man, that I think you have to find the answers to. Everybody will play baseball for free, for the most part. Now, I guess not in today's world, but
right,
for the most part, you're going to play because you love to play. But having the understanding that there's three separate entities to this thing, and you have to coach all three completely separate. Because that's where, in what's happening right now, is it's a business. We're chasing money, and we're chasing things outside of those factors. I see it all the time. I mean, I see it all the time. They tell you, well, hey, coach, I want to, let's just use an infielder, right? I want to develop as an infielder. Okay, well, then you would probably come and play for me, right? Because I've been around Tulo and Longoria and Danny Espinosa, and Devin Lohman was a third round, and the list goes on and on and on. Well, then they commit to somebody else that has no shortstops in the big leagues, let's just say. Well, then why you're not going there because of development? There's always another factor. There's another factor that they think, in my opinion, is going to bring them happiness, but it's not substance.
Right.
Right. So those are the three things, man: person, student, player. Okay, right away. And I think the other part is I would be interested to see how many guys are actually telling these families that it's a business. That for me is right away too. It's like, hey guys, look, here's the deal. This is how college baseball is working. But the problem is a lot of parents don't like that. A lot of families don't like that. They want to hear that, hey, you're going to be here for 3 or 4 years. Well, hey, as you know, most of the time, if you're there for 4 years and losing, you're fired.
Right.
So this is why, how can we marry both? That's the goal. And it's the old Ken Revisa, right? It's the process over the result. Right. So we have to identify the best players that we can help and coach that are willing to buy into what we're about, which is the process, right? Which we have an MVP system: mission, vision, and principles, right? Those are, because if you can't do those things, you can't field a ground ball. I know that for a fact. So if you're not into our mission, then this isn't the place for you. If you're not into our vision, which is like, our vision is Dirtbags today, right? The acronym Dirtbag stands for something. So if we can't be Dirtbags today, it doesn't matter. We can't win the series, and we can't win the pitch. We can't win the weekend. We can't go to Omaha, period. Because you're going to have a lot of hills and valleys. Now, if you can be a dirtbag today, and I'm just using our program, which is our core values, then you have a chance to win the pitch. You have a chance to win the series. You have a chance to get better as a player. And I think the other part is development. How are they going to physically develop you? Like, if I'm a shortstop, I got 5 schools. This is the best guy. This is the best guy for me to develop. Or if I'm a pitcher, or if I'm a hitter, because let's not kid ourselves too. Families are also making this a business as well. They think they want development, And they do, but families are making this all about the business decision as well. How can I market myself? How can I get more NIL? How can I get the biggest scholarship? How can I win more games so I can get on the bigger stage and bigger platform? How can I do this? They're asking themselves the same things too. But yet here's the problem. When a school doesn't offer them, or when school says they're not good enough and maybe cuts them, they get upset. But right now in college baseball, they're the first people to dump you as well. It's a very, very professional world that we're living in. And the better we can identify it, the more we can be super transparent with it, the better off we're all going to be.
Yeah, I was talking to one of our guys who, high school kid who committed to a really big school, and he went to, one of these big travel ball events and didn't have the best tournament, right? And came back from it, was really frustrated and felt disappointed and overwhelmed by really just his mental game and what he went through. And I had a 2-hour Zoom with him where I walked him through. I said, I'm just listening to what you're saying, right? If I just take notes on exactly the words that you're using and what you're saying, you're so focused on the result. And the reality is what ultimately will bring you confidence isn't going to be the result. Because as baseball players, think about this. Is there a world in which you can do everything perfect, right? You swing at the right pitch, or if you're a pitcher, you place that pitch perfectly. It's the best pitch you've ever thrown. The statistics will tell you like nobody should hit this. Is it also possible that somebody can hit a home run off that pitch? Of course it is. That's the game of baseball. It's failure, right? Mm-hmm. And so I said this to him, and I said, what ultimately should bring you the confidence is all of the work that you have done leading up to attending that event. When you look back, and so what we ultimately did is we created this massive calendar where he listed out all these different things that he was committed to doing every single day. And what it reinforced to him is when he shows up at this next event, okay, there's no world in which anybody who's at this event is doing as much as I just did for this past month to prepare for this event. And that needs to be the reinforcement for him as he goes into this tournament. But, we all know how this goes. Most players, it's hard, right? Mm-hmm. It's easy to look at the result. It's easy to show up and say, I'm better than everybody. I should get 4 knocks today. It's hard when you're 0 for 4 with 4 punch outs to actually take a step back, to analyze it properly, to show up the next game and to be effective. Right. And so I think, look, from an agent's perspective, that's a lot of the stuff that I work with guys. But what I'm hearing you also say is you're creating a culture. You're right. You talk about MVP. Mm-hmm. You're creating a culture that is bigger than the result of the game. If a player expects to take a ground ball, but he's not bought into the mission, he's not bought into the vision, and he's not bought into the principles, you ultimately know that's going to lead you to failing at some mm-hmm. point down the road. Maybe you can get away with it for a week. But in the long run, if we're going to Omaha and you're going to be the guy that I know you can be, we got to clean this up now.
For sure. Yeah, it's longevity, right? We're trying to build longevity, and part of this thing is you have to develop these principles within yourself, that you're not right. Boundaries. I talk a lot about boundaries because everybody's always like, man, how do you got such good boundaries? It's like, it's easy for me because if it doesn't align for me, then I'm out. And that's my own persona. So I've developed over time through a lot of trial, a lot of error, a lot of personal growth, a lot of personal challenges is what I stand for every day. Right? Who am I every day? And as long as I know who I am every day, and as long as I stay true to who I am every day, then we may go 0-56. But I'm going to walk out of there, as like you just said, and I'm going to walk out there and be really good and be like, hey, I'm good. I mean, it happens. Life happens, right? And part of it, going back to your thing about your calendar, right? I used to do a thing. I don't do it as much anymore, but I'm more routine oriented. But I use my calendar for that stuff. But is habit share, right? It's something that I would encourage. Have you ever heard of it?
No.
Yeah, so I would encourage it with your guys. Is habit share, and you basically. So you're their accountability partner without maybe texting or calling all the time. It's just an app. And so you and I are on habit share, and it says work out 5 times a week, but I only got 1 day clicked off on it. Well, now you text me and you're like, hey man, where are you at on this thing? And so you're creating accountability partners within your teams, but that goes back to culture too. And there are things like that. It's like getting up and moving your body. I got to drink 2 gallons of water. I want to get in my Bible 3 times a week. I want to go on a walk 4 nights a week. Like, these are all things that you can control, right? So these are all things that will better you and better your headspace in order for you to have some physical results. And so we use that a lot. And I'm actually going to get back into it with this program here at Long Beach. We're going to get back into Habit Share, and I'm on there. Our team's on there, and it's a created accountability partner.
You know, I brought up kind of what's a big misconception that parents have about college baseball. What would you say the biggest misconception is players have about college baseball?
I think part of it is I don't know if that's a good question. I think there's a lot to it, a lot of layers to that. But I think the misconception is sometimes that I'm going to go there and I'm just going to go ahead and get drafted, because that's the only mindset that they're looking for, right? And I understand that. I think it's a very individual sport in a team setting, right? And I understand that part, and I get that, and I think we have to speak to that, right? It's a very confrontational game too, right? Confrontation, very individual sport in a team setting, but I think it's like all of a sudden I'm going to go here and I go to Tennessee, or I go to Vanderbilt, and I go to Long Beach State. I go to all these schools, and I'll be drafted in 3 years. Well, that's not the case anymore, right?
Right.
There's not 50 rounds. There's 20, right? And every guy you draft, you got to let go within the org, and they don't understand all that stuff. But I also think too is what it actually takes to be really good, and meaning that. Because everybody's a high school American, everybody's really good in high school. But what's the work that it entails here? Because we do have our rules. We can't be with you 4 hours, 5 hours a day, right? So a lot of this thing is going to be you doing what you need to do on your own, and understanding that, quantity over quality doesn't work. But how can I go get 50 game-like swings off the machine? How can I do that tonight? How can I go to study hall on my own? How can I always use pushing in chairs. How can I push in other people's chairs or my own chair at a table? Like, all that stuff is work that you're putting in the bank. And it's happening most of the time on your own dime, because we can't be with you.
So what I hear underlying kind of all the things that you've talked about thus far is, and I interviewed Alex McClure, who I know, West Coast cross-checker with the Tigers. And we talked a lot about kind of the makeup, right? The things that a lot of these scouts pay attention to is on the field makeup and off the field makeup. And it sounds like for any college coach, one of the biggest components to this is, what is your off the field makeup? Because I can only commit so many guys. And obviously the number of scholarships has gone up, but I can still only commit so many guys. Mm-hmm. I got a limited number of spots on this team. How important is the makeup of a player as you identify guys to figuring out who's ultimately going to, work with your program?
Well, I have it pulled up on my computer here. It's like the 7 elements, I call them, of team composition, right? So here's what I go through with our staff on what we want to do, right? Obviously the talent, right? You do have to have talent, and how skilled's the player. Because if you don't know how skilled the player is, or if you can't help coach it, it's not a good fit for you. And that's another misconception in college baseball. We get so caught up in, we got to recruit the guys around our hood, which is great. I love that. I want to recruit Long Beach guys too. You got to own that. But with that understanding, you got to understand what you can coach and what you cannot coach. But our ego is so big in this game that we think we can coach it all. And in fact, that's not the truth. So us as coaches need to check ourselves too a little bit. Anyways, but that's a whole nother topic, right? But number 1 is talent, how skilled. Number 2, I talk about character, values, your morals and values. What are they? I want to know what you stand for off the field. Well, coach, I stand for discipline. I stand for trust. I stand for accountability. Perfect. Okay. Now, how can you marry your on the field versus your off the field? right? Because as you know, in your industry too, we have people living double lives. We are who we are personally, and we are who we are professionally, and they're not married. So it's always an inner struggle every day. These guys battle every single day. So Eric Musselman and his wife actually have helped me with that, right? When we were together in Nevada, is
the basketball
marrying,
coach?
Yeah, he's a huge mentor of mine and a great friend. And we helped mesh, bringing my wife and family into my profession, because I wasn't that way. It was like, hey, I'm going to work. I'll do what I need to do. And then I'll be home after I'm done recruiting at 10, 11, 12, and I'll get up at 6. I'm going to do it all over again. And you just, you kind of take care of the family and take care of the kids, and I'll see you when I'm done. And it wasn't really till my coaching career changed a little bit too, by bringing my family into that. Right. But the other part is team stuff. Getting back to that is fit, right? Mesh with the current team and organization. How do they mesh? Like, how do they fit in with the personalities, right? I think that, and then the fix. I talked about that a little bit. Fix is what weaknesses, what strengths, how can we coach them? How can we not? How can somebody on the team get to them? Value. How will this player increase the value in our organization? And it may be the 40th guy is just the culture guy. That's okay. But how does this guy create value? And I'm not talking about just physically. I'm talking about both, right? And then the two more things is risk and trust, right? Risk. What will they fully understand their role, right? Because there's a risk in that, right? Because if they don't fully understand and we don't communicate that to them, you're gonna uproot this culture that you're trying to create. So if they don't understand they're a fourth outfielder competing for a job, then if they think they're the starting center fielder, as you know, you've dealt with players too, that's hard. It's hard. It's going to be a hard deal to get through. If they don't understand that they're a one-inning guy right now, they don't understand they're a plus-minus guy, doesn't mean you can't be a Friday starter the next year or you can't work into that. But if they don't understand the risk on both sides, then we don't want any part of it. And the last one's trust. Will they be reliable and dependable at all times? At all times. And I think that's what you're trying to look for. And that's what you're trying to accomplish. And not anywhere on there did it say hit 50 home runs this year. I need you to drive. I need you to hit 320 with bases loaded. I need you to punch out, walks to punch outs needs to be 9-1. None of that says that. So that's kind of where we try to bring all this in the recruiting talk. And it may help and it may hurt, but ultimately we're staying true to who we are and the value system of what we are. And that's what Long Beach State baseball is going to be known for moving forward.
Yeah. And you're going to be somebody, because you're so honest, will get the guys you ultimately should get, guys that would flourish, who are not afraid of what you're saying. And I think that's another element to this where, let's say it's not you, it's somebody else. It's just a college coach. And they go into this recruiting process and they're like, we got to win. I'm just going to try to go get the best player at every position. Right. And so they're just loading up on guys, and they tell every outfielder, you're going to be a starter. They tell every shortstop, you're going to be the starter. And then it's such a short-sighted way of thinking, because guess what? If you're lucky and you actually do get all these guys to show up on campus, now, you're full of shit. You're full of shit to somebody because you told everybody that they were going to start, and there's only one shortstop.
Yep.
And I think that happens a lot in your guys' world. And it happens in ours too. It's why agents get a bad reputation, right? Yep. It's why coaches get a bad reputation. And so I think we're all kind of battling and dealing in this world where it's like, we have to be so committed to doing it right. And that may result in we don't get the guy that we wanted to get at this one time, but over time, through the work, through the dedication and the commitment to what we say we're going to do, then it ultimately is going to result in wins for you and obviously representing the best players for me.
Yep. Well, yeah, and going back to that, going to that thing is like every coach talks about dependability and reliability and accountability and trust and all this stuff. Well, you're not creating that because you just got done telling 5 shortstops to the starting shortstop. Right. So you're not even living your values, and that's okay. But at the end of the day, the baseball game's going to run out, right? Your clock is going to expire at some point at whatever age it is. My question for those guys that do that is, you may have 10 more national titles than me, and that's okay. But I know at 80 years old, no one's going to ask you about your national championships because no one cares.
Right.
Right. And that's the whole thing. And hey, I'm not saying it's easy. I battle with it too all the time. I do. It's like, I want more. I want this. I got to do this. And we're trying to justify whatever we're trying to justify. And really, if we were to just take a step back and understand who we are as people, and then get that foundation first, solidify that, and then that will just allow us to move free and easy in the coaching or in the professional world, whatever you need to do. But if you're wrestling with the other part first, getting that dialed in, then who you are, I think it's just at some point it's going to be a train crash somewhere along the lines. I don't know when, but there's going to be a train crash.
TJ, how do you deal with the transfer portal? Because I think, go back to when we played, right? Like, you couldn't transfer, right? I mean, there'd be circumstances where you could, but it didn't exist like it does today. And I've seen baseball change. And, you brought up earlier how in college it's kind of turned into professional baseball. Everybody's a free agent. And I feel like, these players who at one point 10 years ago, they'd go to a college. Let's say they chose the SEC. I'm going to go to the SEC. I'm not going to play as a freshman. I'm just going to get experience. I'm really kind of banking on learning my freshman year, playing my sophomore year, and then being the guy my junior year to eventually get drafted. And now if you go to a place and you don't really play a lot as a freshman, I feel like, these guys are so nervous that the coaching staff is going to go out there and get the guy that now is going to come in, whether it's a junior college or another 4-year. How have you found kind of the best way to utilize the transfer portal? And like, what is it for you?
Yeah, I don't even know if I found the best way, to be honest. I think it's forever changing based on where you're at, what you're trying to accomplish, all that stuff. I think the portal is great, but I think depending on where you're at in the pecking order is when you're going to get into the portal. If the portal opens on July 1, let's just say, and I'm in July 1 and I'm hunting the first 50 players, probably not going to get them because I don't have NIL money, because those guys are all about money. Right. They want what they want. They're not willing to sit, like you said. I mean, go through the shortstops here at Long Beach State. You had Bobby Crosby, then you pass it along to Tulo, and then all those guys had to wait their turn. Everybody had to wait their turn to play. No one's waiting their turn anymore. 4,000 players in the portal this year. I mean, that's incredible.
4,000?
Yep. That's incredible. Think about that.
Wow.
And why are we okay with that? Why is this? Well, how did we get to this point? But a lot of this thing is, like you said, I think going back to your original question is, I don't know if I found a good way how to utilize the portal. I think we have to stay true. The best way I can tell you is we have to stay true to what we're looking for. And right off the bat, if you're looking for money, then we're not the fit for you. And that's okay. Right. That's okay. If you're into development and you got a chip on your shoulder and you want to play and prove everybody wrong, that's how this program was built. This program was never built off of getting the best player, getting the 5-star player. This program was built off development. It was built off of the person. It was built off getting the guy that believed in something bigger than himself. That's where at some point we have to get the game back to. And I think they'll swing back that way.
So do I. Well, like every market, just in life, right? Like markets typically overcorrect before they come back to kind of neutral. And I think, look at Major League Baseball. Major League Baseball is doing the same thing, right? I mean, the analytics departments are insane. And it's funny, I was thinking about this earlier today. I'm interviewing Dr. Meister, the team doctor with the Texas Rangers. And he's been very vocal about, arm issues and like, where's this coming from? Why do we now find ourselves in this world where there's so many Tommy Johns that are being done, way more than there's ever been? And I was thinking about it, and I'm like, what's interesting is as I think about Major League Baseball, and by the way, like, I don't blame them, because there are some really, really smart people working for these teams. And you basically give them, like, picture this, you give them a car and you ask them to take it apart and then put it back together and make it run faster. That's what they're doing with baseball players. They figured out through metrics and analytics, if you can do this and manipulate this pitch in this way, it's going to be more effective. And if you can do this and throw more velocity, it's going to be more effective. What we don't see, though, is what does that guy's arm look like in 10 years? What does that guy's arm look like in 5 years? And so we're only going to learn the hard way, and we're starting to now, where obviously Tommy John surgeries are going up. And I think college baseball is the same, right? There's going to be an overcorrection first, and then hopefully we come back to normal. Will they realize, a lot of people, especially, in college coaching, realize this isn't actually what's best for everybody. There is some marrying of giving players the freedom to leave and not be in a bad situation, but also the commitment needs to mean something as well.
Sure. Yeah, I
right?
think part of it is too, right? It's like and that's a good point, but look at the degree nowadays. Right. People, when we were coming through high school and college, we needed to go to college because the degree was so prevalent. Right. Well, now people are making just as much money, if not more, in some capacity without one. But what does the degree really teach? Does it mean you're smarter than anybody? No.
Right.
It means you have the discipline to start something and finish something. That's what the degree means, in my opinion. Right. So
I agree.
And so that's where, like you said, the commitment part, at some point, it has to come back to, I'm going to be here because I'm going to develop and I'm going to wait my turn. Right. And it's just not that way anymore. And unfortunately, you got so many other things, and these guys have more access to more things than we ever had to, which is another thing too. Right. And I'm not saying anybody's wrong. They got more access and they understand things. And at some point, I think it's going to kind of come back in somewhere. I don't think it's going to come back to what it ever was. But I think there'll be a happy medium because there are some bad situations out there. Right. And there's a kid in a bad situation, and that's okay too. But like you said, leaving a school because you're not playing, that's not fair, especially when you're 18, because college baseball is hard, right? Pro baseball is hard. Rookies don't just go tear up Major League Baseball right away. Some do, some don't. Right. But in the same way in college baseball, there is a growing process with that. Right. But we haven't forced them to grow. I don't think the industry has forced them to grow. And I don't think the parents nowadays are forcing their kids to grow. Because now they're tied up in their kids, their identity as parents. The problem is their identity is tied up in their kids' performance. Why do I care at 10 years old if my kid goes to football tonight and he is the one quarterback or the two? Why do I care? I mean, I care for him, but at the end of the day, it's such a learning curve and a way to teach him about discipline and work. And we're missing the whole boat on the whole thing. We're just upset because he's not number one.
Well, and so, back in the day, and when I say back in the day, let's say 10 years ago, right? When you're going through the draft process, everybody was like, okay, what matters is when I'm 18, whether I go to college or sign in, professionally, like that's kind of when I want to peak. And now it seems like there's no progression. It's all like every year I've got to be ranked high. I've got to show when I go to these showcases. People need to know who I am from the beginning. And so it's like, yeah, naturally, what is that now going to look like then down the road to the player's health, to their mental, their mindset? Like, did they develop how they should have, or were they always chasing the carrot that, as we know, is artificial? And I bring up the draft, and I guess a question I have for you is, you want to obviously sign good players to go to school, right? You want to sign the best players that are going to give you the best chance to win. What would you tell a kid who has the chance to be drafted how to handle the communication with you guys about the draft process? What do you think is like the right thing to do?
I think honesty is always, I think anytime you can just be upfront, honest with your goals and how you want to achieve those goals, but also where you're at. I mean, that's the other part is we're not teaching these kids how to communicate that. Like we're teaching them how to text, right? I'm getting commitments on my text on my phone, not picking up the phone and saying, "Hey coach, I really appreciate your time." I'm getting a text message done to them. But here's what's happening. The parents are doing that to them. They're laying in the other room, texting their son or daughter, "Hey, can you go take out the trash?" Instead of actually getting up out of the room or off the couch and say, "Hey, look, I need you to do this." And you're not, you're not having this one-on-one conversation. You're not creating these environments for them to have these conversations.
Right.
So now, I feel like there's so much pressure on both ends and the kid feels he's a divorced parent, or we're, the agent and pro sides on one side and the amateur college baseball coaches on the other side, and we're divorced parents. The kid doesn't want to let either one down. So he's going to tell you what you want to hear. He's going to tell me what I want to hear. And at the end of the day, we don't really know what's happening. But I think the kid needs to be communicative. But I also think the agent and the pro side need to communicate as well. Because at the end of the day, no one wants to get in a bad marriage. If the kid wants to sign, then he shouldn't come to college. I don't want that. It would be a bad deal. If the kid wants to go to college, then the pro side shouldn't want to sign him either.
Well, so I'll tell you what I tell all these families, and I don't believe anybody else does from what I've heard. So when these players commit, I go, you need to wrap your head around you're going to college to play. Like that needs to be your focus. Because if you think about the alternative position and instead you're not thinking about college, you may have committed to a place, but you're believing the hype. I'm ranked high. The scouts are at my games. Everybody's telling me I'm a first round pick. You start buying into that, right? You play out your spring season. And let's just say for a second, it doesn't go as well as you hoped. At that point, you haven't even thought about really going to college because you've bought into the notion that you're definitely going to sign. So what is the result then? Typically what happens is the player signs, isn't happy about it, signs for less than he wanted, goes into pro ball and is disappointed. And so what I suggest is like, what if you flip that upside down and actually go through the process, buying into the fact that you're going to end up on campus? And if for some reason it doesn't happen, I'm willing to bet it's because some team just came and is like, hey, you're going to be our 5th overall pick. Here's more money than you ever thought you'd make. And then let yourself make the decision from that perspective. But at least know, because what I want is a player, if he shows up in pro ball, he's happy. If he shows up in college, he's happy. It's what he wanted. Not, I didn't like, whatever the result is, I didn't want this. I just felt like I was forced into it. I don't know what happened. Right?
100%. Yeah, 100%. That's what we need. We need more. Hey, you have to think college because that's the immediate future right then and there. You're committed to Long Beach State or wherever you're committed, think college. The other part, the pro stuff, you can't worry about that. It'll take care of itself.
That's right. It's a byproduct of doing all the things right. But as you said, you cannot worry about it. You cannot control it. Because most of the time what they rely on when they're thinking about I'm going to sign is what these scouts are telling them. And I don't think the scouts like intentionally saying, oh, I think you're this one. You're really not that. I think they believe that you are. But that individual that you're speaking to, he may not be the one actually making the decision. So it's fine. You can listen to him. But if all you're doing is putting all the stock into this one person, you're leaving yourself open to be exposed and unfortunately to be disappointed.
Yeah, but that's also too, right? They've grown up telling everybody what they want to hear or telling them what they want to hear. Nobody's really sitting down and saying, hey, look, I think you need to go to college. I think you need to develop here. Or the other way, there are some guys that need to sign. Like, I think it's better for you to sign because X, Y, Z. But nobody's doing that. We're all afraid to let a guy go to school. We're all afraid to let a kid sign.
So I have one last question for you, brother. And I'm realizing as we're talking that we could probably talk for 3 hours. So we're going to have to have a second side to this interview at some point when your time frees up. But my question for you is really about, obviously people know this, Long Beach, their nickname is the Dirtbags, but their actual, call it mascot, is the 49ers. Tell everybody who's listening, like to you, who's now the head coach at Long Beach, what is a Dirtbag? What does that represent?
Good question. Well, so the Dirtbag name, it was always about a style of play over anything else. It wasn't as mainstream as it ever was. I think what happened was, as with anything else, as you grow, it gets more mainstream and this and that's a marketing deal, but it was never about that. It was always about a style of play. You're just going to be tough and gritty. And so how I characterize Dirtbag, right? And this is part of how we do it here, is one of them's discipline. right? One of them, that's a style of play, the discipline to understand your assignment on what's happening at any point in time, right? Discipline, integrity, the ability to respond, right? Respond is one, right? So the ability to respond in any situations. The dirtbag type mentality doesn't flinch, right? They see bases loaded, one out. Yeah, whatever. I've been through it a million times, right? The toughness part, overcoming adversity is another one. Brotherhood, right? It was always bigger than itself. The dirtbag was a brotherhood. Not many people knew outside of the dirtbags what it really meant, right? For a long time there, people thought, oh, you're a dirtbag. It was like a bad name. It's like, no, it's actually a great thing. There's an attitude, right? There's an attitude that comes along with being a dirtbag. You're injecting hope instead of being a hope stealer, right? You're being a hope dealer instead of a hope stealer, right? There's this infectious attitude that you're doing it. Grind, right? It's about the grind, right? Whatever it takes, right? If it takes getting a bunt down, we do it. If it takes taking a hit by pitch, we do it. Sack fly, we do it. It was always that mentality. And the last one was selfless, which was team first. That to me is what a dirtbag is. And that to me is how this thing all started too, right? You didn't care where you practiced. You didn't care where you played. You didn't care who you played. You didn't care that they had more money than you. You just cared about playing the game. And that was how I perceive it. That's what was taught to me during my time here. And I know there may be some other things, but I would almost guarantee that the originators, the 1989 team of this dirtbag name, that's how they saw it as well, because they didn't have everything. They had each other. Right? They had each other. They had balls. They had bats. They had bases. After that, it's a level playing field.
I love it.
So that's really what it was. That's our job, is to get back into that. It's hard in 2024 not to think of other things. Well, we get caught up. Well, they got more scholarship money. They got more NIL money. Well, yeah, but that doesn't mean we can't win. That doesn't mean we can't develop. It's just going to take the right type of guy, and we'll get the right guy. Well, who we're meant to get is who we're meant to get. Mm-hmm. And so I believe that, and we're going to miss out on some guys, and then we're going to get some guys. But if you want to be that, and you want to have substance to not even just your playing career, but your life, then this is the place you want to be. I mean, winning championships a lifestyle. It is not just on the field.
Winning championships is a lifestyle.
Yep.
That's great.
But you have to think that way, right? I have a chance to be a championship dad today. And how I'm going to do that is based on how I'm going to show them, not tell them. Well, they're watching more what I'm doing more than what I'm saying.
Well, you said it. It's in the words you use. Like, winning it's a lifestyle. You have to live it. It's not like, okay, when I get to the field, I'm going to buy in. You have to live it.
Yep.
With everything that you do. And there's this, this saying, and I use it all the time. It's how you do anything is how you do everything.
Yep. And there's another one. I give you, everything matters because everything communicates.
Everything matters because everything communicates.
Yep.
That's great.
So there's just all these things, man. And that's what I don't think everybody understands, in my opinion, is what we just talked about the last 5 minutes. Not everybody understands, because at some point it's going to show up. We just don't know when.
Man, the question that I just come to is, as I'm thinking about these players listening to this, is what are you committed to? Really, what are you committed to?
Yeah.
Because so many players can say, I'm committed to being the best version of myself. But then go look at your behavior. Are you really committed to being the best version of yourself? Because I can call out 3 things that you did yesterday that tell me you're not committed to being the best version of yourself.
Oh, yeah.
So what are you really committed to? And look, I mean, we talked about it this whole time. It's like we're dealing with young men that some of them still need to mature. They need to learn life lessons. And that's where, for me, and I know you share in this, is we have a responsibility. And that also is why I think it's so important that people like you are in the roles that you're in, because that's where real change is going to happen for these guys. Like you talk about Dave Weathers, and I heard, your eyes lit up when you just said his name, and all these other coaches that you mentioned, like they changed your life.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like you recognize the impact that you have on these people. And ultimately that's where you're going to have success, man. That's where I'm like, and look, easier said than done. I get it. But from someone on the outside looking in, I get super excited about what that program is going to turn into, because you're saying all of the things that you're going to start that revolution. Because it's a revolution.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Well, I just think you have to believe, like you said, you've got to believe in something. And those guys have taught me so much, man, about life. Coach Weathers is a father figure to me. Like I said at my press conference, I only played 1 year for him. Now during the 1 year, he taught me so much, but I only played 1 year for him. I didn't spend 4, but I spent 4 with him, or 5 with him, I think, on the coaching side. So I learned more about life. And and there again, this is why I'm so passionate about it. I hit 187. And I would say this today pretty confidently. I am probably the closest person to him.
Oh, wow.
And this guy's coached over $300 million worth of players. So why? Because he invested. Because he invested in me as a person. He didn't make it about wins and losses. He invested in me as a person. And the last thing, I think, right, there's a few things that come to mind. My mind's going everywhere. But, right, it's a few things. Discipline versus default. Think about that, right? And you just talked about it. Do we have the discipline, or are we just going to default to? That's why we don't achieve what we want to achieve. You just talked about it, right? Or I don't have enough discipline. I'm just going to default in what I am. And that's why I can't get to where I'm going to get to. That's why players are the same way. Parents are the same way, right? It's not the kids that have changed. It's the parenting that's changed. The kids haven't changed. The kids are taught the habits from the parents. The parents have changed because they've allowed. You talk about the phone, we're just as bad.
Yeah.
Let's not kid yourself here. My 8-year-old or 9-year-old learns from me, not because he's just grew up with this habit of getting on his iPad. He's learning and seeing me, right? The other part I have up here is principle versus preference, right? What's principle? What's preference? I don't want to push in my chair every day. That's tiring. I don't want to say hi. I don't want to look you in the eyes. I don't want to hold the door open for you every single day. That doesn't matter, man. Your principle is better than your preference. So
Right.
who are you? Who do you stand for? What do you stand for? Right. And the last one, I love it, man. I love this one. It's my favorite. Opportunity versus obligation. Right? Do I have an opportunity to coach at Long Beach State, or am I obligated to do it? Do you have an opportunity to be an agent, or are you just obligated to do it out of foundation, or because that's all you know, or because of money or whatnot? Right? Most people don't look at it that way.
I'm going to send you an article. It's about integrity. And when most people hear the word integrity, they think, am I a good person? Do I do things the right way? And that's an element of it. But I think deep down, when you read this article, it'll help really encapsulate integrity. And I want you to think about it from the standpoint of like, do I do what I say I'm going to do? Because what I think so many players don't realize, like think about it from this perspective. TJ, if I told you that we were hopping on this podcast and I said it was at 1:30, 1:30 p.m. and you got on at 1:30 and I got on at 2. And I said, hey man, I'm sorry about that. I got stuck on a call. That's my bad. You're a good guy. You're probably going to understand. But deep down in the back of your mind, you're like, next time I say, hey, let's hop on a podcast, or I'm going to call you at this time, you're going to be like, is he going to be late? And I think these players and these parents oftentimes don't realize that there is a residual effect when you don't do what you say you're going to do. And the most important thing is you have it with yourself. When I say I'm going to show up on time and I don't, I'll make excuses for why I didn't do it. Mm-hmm. But deep down, I lose faith in myself. So then in the future, when I recognize that I need to do all these different things to be who I want to be, you don't have the confidence that you're really going to do it.
Yep.
And so it kind of ties in all of those things that you talked about. I don't know, man. I feel like we can go on for hours. I can't thank you enough. Is there anything else that, like, something that we didn't talk about today that you want to make sure that we touch on? I want to give you the opportunity to just bring it up really quick.
No, I mean, I feel good. I feel like there's been a lot of truth. I think the hardest part for people is they're going to misunderstand, right? None of us are complaining about things. We have to do a better job, I think, in our industry and as people, is the growth mindset. And that's it. Because we're hearing some things that we may not understand or that is really uncomfortable. But the person that doesn't want to be uncomfortable is a person that doesn't want to grow. Right. And I try to challenge myself every day, but that's why I surround myself with who I do every day too. Surrounded by people that will challenge me, surrounded by people that won't tell me what they want to hear. Because deep down, I know I need that. Right. So I think anybody listening, we don't have the answers, and I think we know, right? I think we have a pretty good understanding, but just how, church talks about too a lot is turn yourself inside out. Right? Not outside in. Right? I think if we can all do that, if we can all turn ourselves inside out, I think we'll all this thing will clean itself up that way.
I love it. Brother, I think that's a great place to land the plane. Mm-hmm. Thank you again. I'm looking forward to seeing you next week in Long Beach. Can't thank you enough, man.
Awesome, buddy. Anything you ever need, man, you're an awesome person and a great friend. So I'm thankful you had us on.
Yeah, absolutely, bud.